If you're a pastor or church leader, you wear multiple hats.
And maybe one of those hats is social media.
So if you're short on time or ideas for what to post on Instagram stories, today we have got you covered.
So we'll be going step by step through 5 repeatable Instagram stories post frameworks that you can reuse every single week.
These frameworks are highly engaging, so you won't lose favor with your audience. In fact, we've been using each of them for more than 5 years now with no signs of slowing down.
And if that wasn't enough, we have step-by-step downloadable guides to share with you as well.
Let's dive in. Well, hey there, and welcome to the Pro Church Tools Show. We're here to help you and your church navigate the biggest communication shift in 500 years. I'm Brady Shearer, your host. I'm joined as always by my co-host. We call him Reverend Rat Trap. It's Alexander Mills.
Hello.
And today, it's part 2 of our mini-series on Instagram stories. Last week's episode was titled Why Your Church's Instagram Stories Flop, where we talked all about the stories algorithm, how it works, and everything that you need to know to excel. You can go back and watch or listen to that episode if you haven't already. Today, it's about actual step-by-step strategies. We've got 5 for you. Importantly, these are repeatable. So these are frameworks that you can use every single week. It's not just like do this post once and, pray to God for the future. We've got downloadable guides for you as well, linked in the description on both YouTube and the podcast. No email opt-in needed. Just click to download. And it gets better. No fancy gear is required whatsoever for any of these. And we're going to go in reverse chronological order here from 5 to 1 with the final strategy that we share being, at least in my opinion, we'll see what Alex thinks, the absolute best, most surefire option for you. So Alex, take us away. Reverend Rat Trap with Instagram story strategy for churches. Number 5.
That's a story we'll have to tell on another show. Number 5, the slider select.
The slider select. So on last week's episode, we talked about the importance of engagement history as a signal to the story's algorithm. So each of these 5 frameworks that we're going to discuss today for you has a spotlight on engagement. We're not just trying to maximize views, we're trying to maximize engagement.
Yep.
And the amazing byproduct of maximizing engagement is that certainly you will maximize views. So how about you explain the slider select? Because I feel like you may have been Archbishop Architect behind this idea.
This was, and what's so great about this strategy is it's a handful of years old at this point and still working. Before we get into this, one quick note: if you didn't listen to last week's episode, you have to know you shouldn't have to go back to listen to know this, that the stories part of Instagram has a unique algorithm to the feed. We talked a lot about that last week, but that's important to what we're talking about here. It is a unique algorithm. So this one, the story select, I think we're going to show an example here if you're watching on YouTube. The slider select. It's a way to use the slider feature in Instagram stories that actually has some merit or some value. When the slider feature came out.
Right, the emoji slider, where you can choose what emoji. Choose the fire emoji.
Yeah.
Choose the sunglasses face emoji.
Yeah. When it came out, I just thought this is so useless.
Yes.
And so in a way because when Instagram does debut a new feature, they want you to use it. And it's hard to quantify, but we do see anecdotally that they will prioritize your content if you're using the new feature. So back when the slider feature came out, it's okay, this in and of itself feels a little useless, slide to show how fire this post is or whatever.
Right, because let's imagine someone posted a baptism photo and then there's a fire emoji slider. What sicko is not sliding?
Exactly. Exactly. And so we try to come up with a way to how can we make this meaningful? And so we are using the slider, but just adding a little bit of annotation to make it valuable. So you see in this example, we're asking a question. Hey, how are you doing? And so you can choose whatever emoji you want. A thumbs up, a fire, I don't know.
Smiley face.
Yeah, the party face emoji.
Prayer hands.
Yes. But by using the annotation and the text editor, we're adding some value here. So I'm annotating 4 lines across the slider starting at the left side, which is the left side is, if you're answering the left side, it's you're not doing too good. And if you're answering the right side, you're doing great.
Right. If it's a slider, think of the very beginning as 0%
Yes.
and the other end as 100%.
Yeah. So the question, just a low stakes question on Instagram. Hey, how are you doing today? On the left, meh. About a quarter of the way through, another annotated line, an okay emoji. Or you could just type okay. 3/4 of the way, good. All the way, great, phenomenal. I'm living on a high. And so by annotating the slider and adding a question, you open up the door for just about endless possibilities to use this by asking low stakes questions and giving your followers a few different ways, a few different levels to answer the question by annotating the slider.
There's something very powerful about specificity. This type of slider select feature, where you take that slider and you just annotate it to make it a little bit more palatable, will drive so much more engagement because there are specific markers, basically 25% of the way along that slider, where people can say, yeah, this is me. Whereas if it's just that slider void, absent of those annotations, it's kind of just like subjective. Like, why am I putting it here? That's the problem with this slider. Like, okay, like, why am I at 50%? Why am I at 75%? Why am I at 25%? And so it doesn't even like give you usually any valuable feedback as the creator. And for users, people that are viewing your story, there really isn't that much incentive to use it. One of the other ways I've seen this done was like, how was your weekend? And so this was one that Alex did at his church. It was like, pretty bad actually. Could you pray for me? As the 0%. 25% was average. 55, I guess it would be broken up into 33% and 66% if you're thinking about the 100%. Pardon me. So 0% pretty bad actually. Could you pray for me? 33% on the slider average. 66% pretty good. And then full slider all the way. Church was my highlight. And so then what happens is this gives you the amazing ability to go into the responses and take action on it. And this is what separates an engagement strategy from an engagement strategy with a missional underpinning.
That's right.
And so we got this testimony from a church because we've talked about this strategy dating back several years. And again, every single strategy that we're going through, I kind of went in and I took inventory and I was like, okay, what new things are we going to come up with? I was like, oh, all the things that we like taught 5 years ago and haven't talked about in a very long time, and so we need to cover them again, are still working. And so that's another reason that you can feel confident in using these, because they're still great. So this church sent us this testimony and they said, we got 15 responses from this, 15 conversations, 9 times of prayer. Amazing strategy.
Amazing.
So what that means is for all the people that were like, yeah, I'm just doing okay, they saw that. And because the people responded and literally told that church, this is how I'm doing, they're opening up that conversation. This isn't like a cold DM, like, can I pray for you? They've said, this is the place that I'm in. The church was observing that. And then they responded and said, hey, let's talk about it. Let's pray. That's social ministry right there.
Exactly. You want to move on?
Let's.
Number 4, the irresistible question.
The irresistible question. Asking questions on social media is tremendously powerful. The problem is every single church asks the wrong type of questions. So what makes an irresistible question? There are 2 variables, 2 components. It has to be low stakes plus a strong opinion. I'll say it again. Low stakes plus strong opinion. And like the previous strategy number 5, that has an entire slider select PDF that walks you through exactly how to do it in the stories database or in the stories interface. You can see it. We have 39 copy and paste social media questions. Like, we just did all the work for you on today's episode. Download it. I'm not even asking for your email. We're just giving this away freely. So what makes a great question? What makes them irresistible? Low stakes, strong opinion. Let's get into some examples here. What was your favorite childhood show growing up? What's a worship song that has helped you feel closer to God? Let's be clear. Sometimes low stakes and strong opinion is like, does ketchup belong on a hamburger? Sometimes it's, what's a worship song that's helped you feel closer to God? That's very specific, but it's not so specific like rank your number 1 worship song of all time.
Right.
It's like any worship song that
the stakes are too high for that.
Precisely. Stakes are too high. All right. What is the best breed of dog and why? What's one piece of advice you give to your younger self? What's your how did you first hear about our church?
Great. I love that one. And you get to turn the answers to that into other pieces of content.
100%. Now you're remixing it. Now you're spinning it. That's called user-generated content. We call that UGC in the industry. And so you kind of throw out a question. People create content in response. And then you springboard and create more content. Today I was just doing some fun Instagram stories because we bought these new bowls from Fable because there was this one bowl in our house that was like the right size for the yogurt breakfast bowls that I make and the rice bowls that I make at lunch.
A larger bowl.
Yeah. Like, it's like low cal, high volume. And there's just like all the other bowls. I'm trying to mix the bowl. Stuff's falling out of the bowl. Had to buy some new bowls. And I couldn't tell you how excited and just like, they made me so happy. So I posted about them. And I was like, oh, big bowls, small spoons. If you know, you know. And people responded like, what's the recipe? So they responded. I wrote them back what the recipe was. I screenshotted it. I posted it again. Someone else responded, is that a Fable bowl? It's like, yes. I post that again. And so it was like this back and forth that was creating the content.
And this is so important. We talked about it on last week's episode, but it's worth repeating. Like, you called this a throwaway post, but it matters in the scope of your mission on social, which is helping churches navigate the biggest communication shift in the last 500 years, in the sense that this is engagement. People are engaging with your story about bowls, which in and of itself, sure, it's a throwaway post, but that's a signal to the algorithm next time when you post something valuable, next time you post a link to this show or a link to our next YouTube video or your next carousel post, something really meaningful. The folks who engage with you today about bowls are more likely to see it.
The engagement is crazy.
Right.
Like, and
that's how those posts work.
This is not a strategy because it's not repeatable for every single church because you need a pastor or a visible person that people recognize to actually take the initiative. But I hadn't posted on stories in a few days, and I don't have personally a firm I must post on stories this often because I don't want to do any throwaway content. And we're publishing so much content. So like stories, I post them as they come to me. Yeah. But I had, I'm making my breakfast and it was Thursday. And so Thursday is kind of like the end of my content week. It's like I've done 5 posts for the week. I've done my newsletter. I've done my podcast. I've done my YouTube video. I've just crushed it. And this was a great week. I was feeling great. And I was like, you know what though? I haven't done a story in a while. And that's probably useful.
Look at this breakfast bowl.
And I was like, this bowl is making me happy. And if someone wants to talk to me about a bowl, I'm happy to talk to them about a bowl.
Right.
And then it did so well that I made lunch and I made it in the bowl. The problem is that now all the bowls are in the dishwasher.
I was going to say, how many bowls did you buy?
Only 4.
Yes,
and I made breakfast and lunch for me and wifey, and
only 4 because it's from Fable and that's all you could afford.
They were actually on sale. I was pretty happy with them. Yeah, bowls from Fable. Okay, just a few more questions. This is a great one. Describe your church using only emojis, or describe our pastor using only emojis. That'll just break Instagram with how many responses that you're going to get. Anything that's related to food that is a strong opinion is always great. So if you want to make these like with that missional underpinning, anytime you do something that's food related in person,
potluck, church picnic,
take a photo and then bring that to stories. So you do a potluck and let's say it's like spaghetti and meatballs. Like, fresh cheese grated on your pasta? Yes or no? Do a poll, whatever it might be. Irresistible questions. We are going to share all 39 of these copy and paste questions. They're in the description. We won't go through every single one now, but they're there for you.
By the time you post all 39 of those, you will have probably exercised the muscle well enough to be able to come up with your own irresistible questions.
Great point.
Once those 39 have run out, the next one, the Poll Precursor.
The Poll Precursor. So the Poll Precursor, the idea here is the poll story feature is probably the GOAT, I think.
For engagement.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, exactly. And we're going to get later into one that's like very, very specific. But the poll precursor is basically what Alex described on last week's episode, which is like anytime you need to revitalize your stories, anytime you want to promote something or you want to post something, but you're like, how should I start this? Yeah. If you start it with a poll, what that does is it gets everybody to click on that poll because that first slide is going to draw a ton of views and engagement.
Exactly.
So let's say you published something, for example, like, are you the type of person that likes cheese on your hamburger? Yes or no? And there's a photo on the background behind this poll of the most recent church barbecue because you had one and you had burgers there. Yeah. You publish that as the first story. And everyone's clicking yes or no. On the next one, you say, you know what? Whatever you're into, it's your choice at our next church barbecue.
Exactly.
This Sunday after church.
Yeah.
Publish that second slide on its own. 1/10 the views.
Totally.
Publish the poll as the precursor. Game changer.
Yeah. Another example. So every other week I write like a pastoral letter to my church. I don't like make them widely available because there's some like personal information in there. We keep them private.
Now what would you do if that was happening? Create your close friends on Instagram stories.
That's true, yeah. But this week I wrote one that didn't have too much personal information, but like I was really proud of, and so I wanted to share it. And in the letter, I made like a metaphor with collecting the sugar snap seed pods from our garden. And so I know that, and we talked about this last week, posting links on their own on stories just doesn't perform well comparatively to other content. But the link is what I want people to click on the link to read the blog post. And so I'm going to use a poll precursor. And the first question I'm going to ask is like, hey, are you growing your own vegetables this year? Because I know a lot of folks in our church are into vegetable gardening. So low stakes question, yes or no, easy to answer. That's going to boost the engagement on that post, which means the next slide is going to get shown to more people than if I hadn't used that poll precursor. And on the next slide, I'm going to post a link to that blog post that has to do with, like I said, part of the metaphor is collecting seed pods from our sugar snap peas. So it's topical, it's congruent, it's not disingenuous, but it is like with the algorithms, we're playing a little bit of a game to make sure that our post get in front of, get seen by the people we want to see them. And that's just, we know that this is how this algorithm works. And so we are using the poll as a precursor to kind of boost engagement on that first post to make sure that our next one gets as many eyes as possible.
And this is worth emphasizing. And I think this might be the most important thing I say on this entire episode, and it wasn't in the script. You as a communicator in your church surely feel the pressure from other leaders, from senior leadership above you, from leadership below you, from volunteers, from ministry leaders across the church. Hey, I have this thing that matters. We need to talk about it. And what happens is we end up promoting in church not with the goal of effectiveness. The objective just becomes basically pacifying people that want these things to be done. And this is so detrimental to the idea of actually getting people involved. Right? And this is where method takes the place of mission. The method of just like, I just don't want people to be angry at me, rather than the mission, which is like, do we actually want people attending these? So let's imagine you have 3 different parties. One is a ministry volunteer who runs a small group of some kind or a ministry of some kind. One is the lead pastor who wants like, sermon series promoted. And the other is like a peer. So if you're the youth pastor in charge of social, they're the worship pastor or something. So like you're like even on the org chart. And all of them are like, hey, we need to talk about this. We need to talk about this. What ends up happening is you're like, okay, fine. My goal is just like to make them shut up or to just make sure that they're taken care of. I do care, but also like I'm one person. And so what do? You post an Instagram story that just says, we got a barbecue next Sunday, come. And the ministry leader who cared about that says, thank you, you did your job. The thing is, then you remember our podcast and people like us that are like, okay, yeah, you pacified them, but like it didn't work. So it's like, hey.
It's not going to lead to the next step you want people to take, which is come to the barbecue.
Right, which is the great irony of that. And so, yes, it takes extra work to promote something. In fact, it is much harder to promote something than to post a piece of content void of promotion.
Right.
Because people don't want to be promoted to. People just want to be entertained. They want to be educated. They want to be inspired. They just want to like waste time on social. Why aren't people looking at your church's promotions? Nobody goes on social to be promoted to. So if you're going to promote, you actually have to do a lot more work than if you were not going to promote, which is why we're doing all of this wizardry, all of this like, oh, it's a poll precursor, it's a slider select, like must everything be alliterated? Yeah, it's the only way people are going to respond to promotions to begin with.
Exactly. Okay, moving on. Number 2, keeping in step with the alliteration, Tuesday trivia.
Tuesday trivia.
Could be Thursday too, but only Tuesday or Thursday.
Yeah, it could be Thursday trivia, but that visually alliterates, but it doesn't phonetically alliterate. Tuesday trivia. Honestly, you can do trivia any day. I call it Tuesday trivia for the sake of alliteration. So this is just using the quiz feature on Instagram, and we're basing it around biblical trivia. So we have an entire set of biblical literacy quiz questions that we created for you for Instagram stories. So for instance, we'll start easy. What was the first miracle Jesus performed? It's not so easy. I was like, keep down further.
It's like, wait, which one is
Changing water into wine, healing leprosy, calming a storm. Now, don't worry. Alex has done the generous work of providing the correct answer for you. But you can move these around. And there are, I think...
I also tried to stay away from anything controversial, like who wrote the book of Hebrews? Like, no, we're not going there.
A special letter to the church. This week on Instagram, we had an inflammatory moment, and we'd like to apologize. So there's a bunch of pages. This is 10 pages of PDF overall, where you can create Instagram stories directly from this. I think one way to level it up, though, is to do trivia that's based around the upcoming message.
Totally.
Right? Like, this is great. It's obviously relevant to the mission of your church because you're helping people learn about the Bible. But could you help them learn about the passage of Scripture that is the source text for this weekend's message? Now, okay.
Yeah, that's totally it. And I'll be the first to admit I don't have a strong Instagram story strategy at my church. I'm at least not employing it right now. I just don't have the time and energy.
Hey, you're the one that came up with all these strategies.
Yeah.
You're equipping the global church.
Right. And so we're just focused on taking no weeks off on the feed, but we're employing the same strategy, which is either coming up to Sunday or coming out of Sunday, knowing that we're preaching on something topically. Like if we're coming up to Sunday on Saturday, maybe I'll post a scripture verse post that is the scripture that we're going to talk about on Sunday. Or coming out of Sunday, I'll do this a lot. I'll make a carousel post or a list post based off the 3 points of the sermon or something that came out of the sermon, just to keep that content, that topical content, like lingering in the psyche of our church, because we know, like, I don't know. I don't know how other people receive lecture style pieces of content, but like a lot of it goes in one ear and out the other. But this is very formative stuff we're talking about. We're talking about the story and the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so we want what we do on Sunday to be actually formative. And so that looks like re-engaging with the same piece of content throughout the week through our ministry on social. And so the quiz or the trivia and the quiz feature on Instagram is the perfect way to do this. So like you said, either leading up to Sunday or coming out of Sunday, using the topic of the trivia and having it be congruent with what you're doing on Sunday morning or Wednesday evening, that's a really effective way for the stuff you're talking about at church to actually be formative in the lives of the folks who belong to your church.
And I'm a big fan of using it leading up to Sunday. Let's use this first question in our PDF as an example. What was the first miracle Jesus performed?
Right.
Changing water into wine, healing leprosy, calming a storm. The answer is changing water into wine. So what you can do is you can post that on Saturday night, let's say. And, yes, we'll have to forfeit Tuesday trivia. Yeah. Give me a few minutes in my head. I can come up with a alliteration that should be just as close to as good.
Yeah.
So you post that on Saturday. And then on Sunday, you look at the results and you see, okay, so 38% of the church got this right or whatever.
We've got some work to do.
Yeah. So then Sunday morning you're preaching and say, okay, I turn to this part of the, this passage. We're going to be, this first text today is changing water into wine. And we asked on our Instagram stories last night, what was the first miracle Jesus performed? Because this is the first miracle that Jesus performed. And 38% of you got that right. And then you shame your church.
Exactly.
Right?
You call them out by name because you can see who voted for what.
Precisely. You can. and here are the people that give in our church, and here are the ones that don't know anything about the Bible. Wow. This is frankly a Venn diagram where there is no overlap. Yes. I'm shocked. So the idea is now in person, there's this carryover effect from before. And the first time that you do that, it probably won't lead to much, but we talked last week about predictable and repeatable content formats. If you do the Saturday showdown, I told you, every single Saturday with the quiz, people then begin to recognize, oh, this is going to have something to do with tomorrow. Exactly. And now online is feeding into offline, and offline is feeding into online. And suddenly people are more engaged with the sermon because there was that little bit of precursor to it. And now more people are engaged online because it's a carryover from in person.
Yes. And for me, on my personal Instagram account, the quiz feature comes in a very close second to the poll feature when it comes to just like how people engage with it. Again, when you're asking the right question in the right way, but it's a pretty close second. So I employ the quiz feature on Instagram stories almost as often as I do the poll feature.
Well, that's because a quiz is a poll.
Yeah, exactly. Here we are. We've arrived. Number one. We call this post the alley-oop.
The alley-oop. So I was watching the Olympics recently, and Steph threw an alley-oop to LeBron, and I was like, goat to goat. Wow, that is special. And so the idea behind the alley-oop is this is a version of the Poll Precursor, okay? But it's a very specific version. So if the Poll Precursor is just like shoes, the alley-oop is the Air Force One.
Okay.
It's a type of shoe.
Right.
But it's like, well, that's an iconic silhouette of shoe. So you start the alley-oop, the pass, the lob, if you will, because we don't really say alley-oop anymore.
Right.
Which is a shame because it's a good phrase.
Yeah.
I lobbed it. Yeah. Okay. I don't lob that phrase. Okay. Gosh, I apologize. So the alley in the alley-oop is the poll, and it's a yes or no poll, okay? That's the key. Yes or no. So in this example, we have, do you feel loved by God? Yes or no. And then the slide that comes right after it, the oop, the punctuation, the exclamation point on the lob is the question box. If you answered no, would you tell us why? Question box. With, in a little text underneath, disclaimer, all answers are confidential.
Yes.
Okay? This is like the high stakes version of a story because we are getting into some more serious stuff.
Right.
And you can tailor it, but it's just not as powerful if you go, do you like cheese on your burgers? And if you answered no, can you tell us why? It's confidential. And then it won't be confidential Sunday morning. Yeah. People that don't like cheeseburgers, anti-Americans, Bob, Joanne, Mary. So I love the alley-oop. Yeah. It's a great way of combining, right? All of these are powerful on their own. You combine them together, they become even more powerful. And we want to make this as easy as possible for you. So in the PDFs that we've created, Alex has put together screenshots of like how to actually do this. Like start by opening the Instagram story editing panel and selecting create at the bottom of the screen. Tap the color, like he has gone into extreme granular detail, and there are screenshots. So if you feel unequipped, if you feel like you just want your hand held, if you feel like, you know what, who has the time? We understand who does have the time. That's why we've kept this episode compact.
Yeah.
We've made all these additional guides. Any final thoughts on the alley-oop?
What I love about the alley-oop is that it instructs, it teaches your followers, maybe for the very first time, that there is a real person behind the account.
Oh, wow.
Who is ready to pray with you, ready to have a pastoral conversation with you. It can be really hard to engage with brands online. And truthfully, like your church is functionally, like categorically a brand or like an organization online. It's not a person, right? And so folks may just not know how to engage with who's on the other end, who is on the other end, I don't know. And so when you ask a question like this, you get some honest responses and you use that very important disclaimer like, hey, your response here is going to be confidential. There's a pastor on the other end of this line. That opens the door wide open to not just engaging with that post, but in the future, your followers, the folks who follow you online, knowing, oh, when I need some spiritual direction, there's a real person from the prayer team, a real pastor, a youth pastor on the other end of this Instagram app that's ready to talk with me and it's confidential. That's like you said, we really get into right here, like real meaningful ministry through social media online. So the stakes are high for this one. But the return, I mean, it's eternal. So I love the potential for real meaningful ministry with this strategy here.
At the end of every one of my church services, the pastor will say, and if you want prayer, if you want to talk to somebody, our ministry team is going to be up front at the end of every single service. And guess what? Most people don't take that opportunity. But we make it available at the end of every single service because we never want someone to feel like there isn't a person there who will pray for them and listen to their story and make that meaningful connection. Here's the reality. A lot of people will never take that step to do it in person because it's like, I'm not great with face-to-face. Right. I just prefer not to. It's not that I don't need that, but like I have to walk forward while everyone else is walking backward.
Yeah.
There are so many people that would take that opportunity when it's confidential online. And not only are you saying these responses are confidential, but by the nature of the fact that they're on their phone, the interaction as a whole is confidential. They don't have to walk up as everyone is walking back. And so they can share that, and now they're making that connection. And then on Sunday, maybe they go up to that person because they're like, oh yeah, I'm Pastor Mark here. And they see Pastor Mark and they're like, hey, that meant so much to me. And again, offline is now being inspired by what's online. And it becomes this positive cycle.
Yep.
If you watch or listen to last week's episode, which is kind of setting the foundation, and it's not as fun, let's say, as like these strategies, but I would say it's actually more important. And you pair that with these specific, repeatable, half a decade now proven strategies that you can go to every single week. You pair those together, there is no reason whatsoever that your church should not be excelling on stories, not just for the sake of views, not just for the sake of engagement, but for the sake of ministry and mission. Yes. We've made it as easy as possible for you. And so one thing you can do for us, share this with a friend in ministry, with somebody who you know would also benefit. If you think this is valuable for your church, it's surely valuable for your friends in ministry at other churches. Maybe they don't follow this podcast. Maybe they didn't hear it. Send it to them. It's a great way of supporting the show. You can subscribe if you're a podcast listener, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, wherever you listen, on YouTube if you prefer to, watch us, or also you just kind of play the podcast in the background. It's kind of Alex and I watch podcasts these days on YouTube. And thanks as always for your time, attention, and trust. We will be back and talk to you next Wednesday. There are things that you buy, they do not bring joy.
Yeah, today for me it was a rat trap.
What are you gonna do when you trap it?
Oh, it's not a live trap. I am a merciful man, I think. When it comes to rats, not live trapping it. I'm exterminating.
Murdering missionary?
Yeah.
This is unexpected.